Under the sun, a decorated soldier in uniform is slammed against brick and cuffed like a criminal as a bystander's trembling phone captures the injustice. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. It was supposed to be a quiet Saturday morning. Sergeant Marcus Bell, a decorated U.S. Army veteran and current National Guard officer, had just finished his overnight shift helping direct traffic at a flood relief site and, still in uniform, stopped by a small corner store in suburban Georgia for a coffee. He moved down the narrow aisle under buzzing fluorescent lights, shelves packed tightly with canned goods and plastic-wrapped pastries, the hum of the refrigeration units mingling with soft gospel music from speakers above the checkout. His fatigue was heavy in his bones, but his posture remained straight, the stiff fabric of his dress uniform punctuated by ribbons and insignia that spoke of tours in Iraq and hurricane rescues back home. He paused to check the label on a bottle of water, his fingers brushing the condensation, when the bell above the door jingled sharply. Two local police officers, Officer Dan Holloway, tall and broad-shouldered, and Officer Kurt Melvin, shorter but thick around the neck, entered, their boots clicking on the linoleum floor. Their eyes landed on Marcus instantly, scanning the insignia on his chest as if he were an intruder. Without warning, suspicion erupted into confrontation. Holloway leaned toward Melvin and muttered something Marcus couldn't catch, but the tension in their shoulders tightened like a drawn bowstring. Melvin stepped forward, voice loud and rough. "Hey, hands where we can see them." His command echoed off the walls. Marcus froze, water bottle halfway to his lips, confusion twisting his features. He raised his hands slowly, palms outward. "Is there a problem, officers?" he asked, voice calm but edged with caution. "You match the description of someone who was seen shoplifting earlier today," Holloway replied, producing a pair of handcuffs, almost as an afterthought. He advanced with practiced ease. "Put your hands behind your back." "I'm in uniform," Marcus said evenly. "I just got off duty." His words hung in the stale, recycled air. The store clerk, a young man with tired eyes who had watched Marcus browse for nearly 2 minutes, stepped forward. "Sir, he hasn't taken anything." But Holloway grabbed Marcus's wrist and jerked it behind him. The jolt of cuffs biting into skin was enough to draw a sharp breath. Marcus didn't resist. He was trained never to escalate. But inside, something heavy and cold settled in his chest. They escorted him toward the exit, dragging him past the display of lottery tickets and cheap greeting cards. Outside, the late spring sunlight felt harsh after the artificial glow inside. The officers shoved Marcus against the brick wall beside the door, still cuffed, as a trickle of onlookers formed. Someone in the back of the crowd chuckled nervously. Someone else murmured, "He's a soldier, man." Phones emerged, their lens glinting like watchful eyes. Whispers rose to murmurs, murmurs to mutters of outrage. A black man in uniform, handcuffed, for nothing. The uniform that had saved lives, coordinated rescues, stood momentarily shamed against the wall of that corner store, and the crowd's disbelief crackled in the midday air like static before a storm. Regina Powell's hand shook as she held her phone aloft, the screen recording every detail. The dull thud of Marcus's cuffed wrists against the cruiser's metal door, the tight knot of anger in his jaw, the sickening normalcy of 2 uniformed officers violating protocol in broad daylight. She was perched at the edge of outrage and disbelief, her pulse pounding with each neglected plea Marcus tried to utter. This wasn't just an assault on a man's dignity. It was an affront to every oath taken in service of justice. Regina's years in the Attorney General's office had taught her to recognize abuses of power the instant they surfaced. This was one of those moments. Her voice cracked through the charged silence. "This man serves our country, and this is how you treat him," she shouted, but Holloway and Melvin continued their routine as if her words were wind. Their insensitivity only fueled her resolve. She pivoted, stepping aside into the sunlit aisle of bystanders, and dialed the number she knew by heart. "It's Regina. We've got a problem. I just watched 2 local cops unlawfully detain a uniformed officer. I have the footage." She pressed her phone closer to her ear, every syllable a clear summons to accountability. In the back of the cruiser, Marcus's knuckles whitened around the straps of his uniform jacket. He blinked at his own reflection in the tinted window, struggling to reconcile the decorated veteran, the man who had led convoys through hostile zones, organized flood relief, and taught selfless service. With the detainee, his own countrymen had portrayed as a criminal. He had learned restraint under fire, but the sting of betrayal raged hotter than any combat wound. Outside, the crowd swelled, drawn by curiosity at first, and then by collective indignation as Regina's recordings spread through social media. Phones lit up sidewalks like scattered stars. Strangers exchanged grim nods, whispers with claws of contempt toward Holloway and Melvin. Each comment on the clip, "Shameful. This must be stopped. Protect those who protect us," built an invisible wall of hatred around the officers. They had become pariahs in the court of public opinion before a formal inquiry even began. Inside the cruiser, Holloway rubbed his forehead, sweat glistening under his cap. Melvin attempted a joke, his voice faltering, about a mix-up. The officers' flippancy dissolved into frantic whispers as they realized they were outmatched by a single phone call. Regina Powell, assistant to the state's top law enforcement official, hadn't just captured misconduct, she had ignited a legal and moral firestorm. Marcus pressed his back against the seat, awareness sharpening every fiber of his being. He heard Regina's footsteps retreat, felt the crush of expectation from the gathering storm. What began as a routine mistake had mutated into an avalanche of accountability. The hatred toward these officers was no longer a private burn. It was a gathering blaze that would demand justice. In that charged instant, Marcus knew the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. Within hours, the video clip of Sergeant Marcus Bell's arrest had ignited a social media wildfire. By mid-afternoon, the hashtag #HandcuffedWhileServing trended nationally. By evening, major news networks reran the footage in primetime segments. The raw indignity was impossible to ignore. A uniformed veteran, face taut with disbelief, standing cuffed like a common criminal outside a suburban corner store. Tweets exploded with fury. "You're telling me they cuffed a man in uniform?" read one. "What's the real crime here? Being black while wearing service stripes?" demanded another. Veterans shared testimonials of their own brush-ins with misconduct. Civil rights advocates reposted statistical analyses of profiling. Even mainstream commentators, usually cautious, denounced the incident as a staggering lapse of judgment. The relentless churn of retweets, shares, and comments formed a tide of outrage that left no room for the police department to salvage public trust. The department's attempted response, a carefully worded press release insisting that Officers Holloway and Melvin acted in good faith under uncertain circumstances, only poured fuel on the fire. The statement's tone-deaf phrasing, praising the officers' dedication to public safety while omitting any apology or acknowledgement of racial bias, prompted a sharp rebuke from local veterans associations. One spokesperson, a retired colonel, called the release obscene and an insult to every soldier who has worn that uniform with honor. Civil rights groups immediately drafted demands for a full independent investigation, threatening protests and legal action. News anchors read excerpts of the statement on air, then contrasted them with the unrelenting evidence in Regina Powell's footage. No stolen items, no erratic behavior, just a man performing the duties of his service, subjected to unwarranted suspicion. Then, at the height of the storm, came the decisive turning point. Marcus's commanding officer, Colonel Angela Ruiz, stood before a bank of cameras at the State National Guard headquarters. She unfurled a dossier of Marcus's service record. 3 combat tours in Afghanistan, the Purple Heart awarded for valor under fire, leadership in organizing relief efforts after Hurricane Florence, mediation in community outreach programs. "Sergeant Bell's record is the opposite of suspicious," she announced. "He did not deserve to be treated as a criminal. He deserves our gratitude." The words cut through the department's tepid defense like a razor. Overnight, the narrative flipped entirely. Marcus was no accused felon, but a decorated hero wronged by the very badge meant to uphold justice. By the next morning, editorial boards across the country demanded accountability. Commentators marveled at how a single smartphone camera and one principled bystander's call had exposed systemic failure. As the public's outrage swelled, the officers' peers grew uneasy. Internal chatter within the precinct leaked hints of looming disciplinary action. The energy that had begun as stunned disbelief crystallized into searing anger, directed squarely at Holloway and Melvin, and at every institution that had allowed such abuse to occur. In that high-voltage moment, the anger of a nation erupted, refusing to abate until justice was served. 4 days after the corner store arrest, the police chief stood behind a stark lectern in the station's community room, fluorescent lights revealing fatigue lines around his eyes. Reporters pressed forward, cameras rolling as he cleared his throat and read a prepared statement. Officers Dan Holloway and Kurt Melvin have been placed on immediate suspension pending termination. Their actions represent a serious lapse in judgment and protocol that will not be tolerated. His voice was steady, but strained, each word a concession to mounting public pressure. He offered no excuses, only an acknowledgement of institutional failure and a solemn promise to rebuild trust. Outside, news crews clustered under swirling late-spring skies, replaying clips of Marcus Bell in cuffs. Viewers who had watched the ordeal unfold on social media now saw the officers' careers unravel in real time. Holloway and Melvin, once symbols of authority, had become emblems of injustice. Their peers watched in stunned silence as the department's own leader confessed systemic error rather than sparking another defensive spin. Inside the studio of a national morning show, Marcus Bell sat upright, the crisp lines of his uniform mirroring the unwavering calm of his gaze. Interviewers leaned in, eager for sound bites, but he spoke measuredly. "I'm not angry for me," he said, voice low, yet resonant. "I'm angry because I know this happens every day to people who don't wear uniforms, who don't have cameras to catch it. I hope my story means change for them." His words rippled across the nation, reminding viewers that the injustice he endured was neither isolated nor exceptional. That evening, the local town hall filled with veterans, clergy, civic leaders, and ordinary citizens. When Marcus entered, still in his dress uniform, the room erupted in applause. The sound rolled through the packed space like thunder, standing ovation after standing ovation. A communal catharsis for everyone who had felt that wrenching unfairness in their own lives. Tears glistened on cheeks, veterans saluted, neighbors embraced. This was more than gratitude for a soldier's dignity restored. It was a collective exhale, proof that accountability could prevail. Days later, in a ceremony at the state capitol, Regina Powell stood at the forefront of a newly formed civil review board. Appointed by the Attorney General, she vowed to oversee investigations into use-of-force incidents, implement bias awareness training, and ensure that every citizen's rights would be protected, uniformed or not. She spoke of transforming a moment of shame into a movement of justice. Her calm authority reflecting the same steely resolve that had driven her to film that fateful arrest. By week's end, internal memos circulated through the police department outlining revised policies on detainment procedures, mandatory body camera activation, and community engagement initiatives. Training modules were rewritten to emphasize empathy and cultural competence. The walls of the precinct still bore the weight of what had happened, but each poster in the briefing room now proclaimed a simple credo: protect and serve without prejudice. Justice had not merely been served, it had been reforged. The officers who had misused their power faced the consequences of suspension and looming termination. The community, once shaken by a blatant abuse of authority, found unity in vindication. And for Marcus Bell, Regina Powell, and thousands who watched his struggle, one phone call had kindled a transformation rippling outward, proof that accountability, once demanded, could reshape the very institutions meant to uphold it.